Today is the day and Riot has finally released all of the details of patch 10.10. This one's actually looking like a really solid patch, and Riot's done an excellent job across every single role that they touched, and they've touched all of them. So no matter what role you play, make sure you keep your ears open and your eyes also open. But no more delay, make sure you smash that like button, destroy the sub button, and let's jump right in. At the very top of the list, Annie is getting changes, and because of her changes, let's start by breaking down the mid lane. Assassins and very bursty champions have pretty much been top dog in the mid lane for a long time now. Champions like Talon and Katarina, Diana, or even Galio have all been doing pretty well lately. Thankfully though, Riot has managed to put that 200 plus years of design experience to work here in balancing the mid lane out a little bit more. Annie's buffs specifically help her against both bursty champions and champions who take long fights. This means tanky mid laners and burst assassin style mid laners or even burst control mages are much less good against Annie now. They have to either directly outrange her, which some still do, or have some ability to sustain through Annie's damage while being able to outtrade her even though she has great damage reduction. But let me ask you this, do you happen to know who the best performers are in the mid lane right now? I don't know about you guys, but something is just screaming at me saying that Annie is going to be a very solid pick right now on this patch. She's doing okay right now on 10.9, but this is going to set her above the rest of the average competition. Considering that a lot of her buffs directly counter the very best mid laners, she might even just rise to the top. But of course, Annie wasn't the only mid lane champion to get changes this patch. Diana has also been nerfed, Irelia has been buffed, and Katarina has been nerfed, while Twisted Fate received a pretty small buff that is actually a lot bigger than it might seem. So let me paint out this Picasso picture here of the mid lane meta and what's happening on this patch. Katarina and Diana are two of the top tier mid laners right now, and they are both getting nerfed pretty significantly. Diana is losing a solid chunk of health, which means that she won't win out on fights in the early game, and Katarina's scaling gets hit really hard in her passive. Right there alone, two of the best champions in the mid lane just got kicked out from the top tier. While you could say there's still some hope for Diana, Katarina got gutted in her scaling, and she really needs to snowball super hard, otherwise the games just aren't going to go in her favor. At the same time, Irelia, one of the worst performing mid laners because she's pretty difficult, got a buff, and on top of that, Twisted Fate and Annie got buffed. Two champions who were usually around the average performance mark for mid laners. Annie's buff directly counters some of the best champions in the mid lane right now, and Twisted Fate's does too. It might seem insignificant to get a small AD buff and a nerf to your mana cost so that you can afford to use it more often. However, Twisted Fate doesn't really have a problem laning, and him getting a little bit more damage to CS better and poke his opponents better in the early game is a big deal, because every minion that he kills gives him more gold, and if he's able to shove his opponents out and pressure them and still have mana to use his ultimate in roam, that's massive. All in one fell swoop in this patch, Riot has managed to shrink down the upper end of the mid lane while bringing up the bottom and average tier champions a lot. This could shake up the mid lane a huge amount. By now, hopefully you've gotten some useful insight into the multi-layer cake of the mid lane, but we're not done yet. We need to talk about the icing and frosting that goes around it of the jungle. You see, jungle has a lot of impact on mid lane because there's multiple ways that you can gank it from both sides of the map. This means that most of the time, mid laners are going to be feeling a lot of jungle pressure. Mid laners with strong gank setup means that certain junglers can really thrive because they can gank really easily and snowball. But this is where Riot really started to drop the ball. They buffed Nidalee, Udyr, and nerfed Kayn, which is somewhat concerning. Nidalee and Udyr definitely need a little bit of love and help in the jungle because let's face it, they've been doing really average or below average for a long time. And Udyr is a champion who people meme about absolutely needing a rework all the time. Nid and Udyr will have faster clears, which will help them a lot in the current meta, but it's not going to be enough to combat certain junglers, the ones that are at the very top. You see, there is a huge issue, an absolutely massive issue that you cannot overlook in the jungle right now. There are a huge number of junglers who are just too strong and oppressive that other lower tier junglers are lower tier simply because they exist in the way that they do. Certain champions like Wukong, Graves, or even Nunu completely suffocate other junglers. These champions all have some sort of combination of insane sustain, super strong and fast clears, unbeatable 1v1s, or insane ganks that other champions just cannot match. And we saw this before too with a very specific example when Olaf was the best jungler in the game. It didn't matter who you were playing, it didn't matter if you took as many defensive runes as possible, you would get absolutely steamrolled by Olaf in the jungle, because if he ever saw you and hit you with a single axe, you were guaranteed dead unless you had some sort of good mobility. And while the days of Olaf are past us, he's still pretty decent now, but even he loses to some of the strong early game junglers right now. The jungle changes really aren't going to be felt much, if at all, and if anything, the Kayn nerf might be a little bit of an issue, because he does lose a little bit of sustain when he's fighting enemy champions, and considering that he needs every advantage that he can get in order to survive these champions that already have a lead on him, well, that might actually be an issue. The upper end of the jungle champions have to get nerfed in order for all of the other ones who aren't as strong to have a chance. Still, if you're a lot better than your opponent, then you will definitely be able to win even if you're in a bad matchup in the jungle, because there are ways to avoid your opponents and still try to affect the map. And once you have some of those tools available to you, you can kite out some of the best junglers right now. And the best place for you to learn how to do that is on our website, GameLeap.com. Whether you guys are trying to take advantage of all the mid lane changes and learn somebody who's going to be at the top of the meta, or overcome the difficulties of the jungle to get around the really strong oppressive early game junglers, whatever it might be, we have guides up there for you guys. We have everything from the very basics all the way down to the nitty-gritty champion specifics and everything in between. Everything that we have there is done by challenger level players, so it's really a no-brainer. You're getting the best information straight from the source. And if it's there, why wouldn't you want to give yourself the best edge that you possibly can in order to learn, improve, and eventually win in all of your games? But now that you're well on your way to picking up that new champion that's going to give you all the free elo, let me give you somebody who you need to avoid. Don't try to pick up Maokai right now, and don't try to pick up Kled. Riot did not stop on this patch with just affecting mid and jungle. They've hit every role just like I said at the beginning, so for top lane, they decided to hit the two best performers on this current patch. Kled and Maokai both get nerfs. And this is huge because top lane has a large focus on 1v1ing because it's such a long and big lane, and you're only in the lane against your opponent, or maybe the enemy jungler comes by and you have a 2v2 with your jungler. So because of that, individual changes have a really big impact. You can't just escape really easily like you could in mid lane with a flash because the lane is so huge. So the differences here, where Maokai has more mana costs and Kled has longer cooldowns, mean a lot because it's harder to help somebody in the top lane and it's harder to recover from mistakes and weaknesses in the top lane. Maokai will now have to focus on buying some kind of mana item early on in the game to combat the increased mana costs from his really low cooldown Q. And that means that he's going to be weaker in combat because he just doesn't have the same stats. For Kled, since he has longer cooldowns, he won't be able to win the same fights that he could before. He might not be able to get those seriously good remounts off, and even if he does, his abilities might not be ready when he does do that in order to actually secure the kill on his opponents. It looks like tanks and tank shredders are going to be the new look in the top lane after these changes, because Kled no longer has his insane remount, sustain, skirmish potential, and Maokai's crazy mid-game power combined with his sustain will take a hit across the board. And underneath Kled and Maokai, the two best top laners after that are like Volibear and Singed, so make sure to keep your trees watered and lizards on a leash, because top lane is going to be some real big memes if Volibear, Singed, and Quinn end up as the best top laners. But now that we've hit everything else, bot lane is the last place left, and of course they have the AD carries and the supports. Riot has decided to do something really interesting here, where Sivir, Soraka, Mistfortune, and Taric get changes here, and this hits bot lane in three specific different ways. First of all, Soraka is now the strongest healing and sustained bot lane support by a long shot. Nobody can compete. Second, Mistfortune still has a lot of fighting power, but loses a lot of free utility, which means that she's going to struggle a lot more than you might think. And lastly, Taric doesn't get to make people survive fights early on for free just by using his W and 1Q on them. Let's break down what these all mean one by one together. For the first point, obviously nobody can compete with Soraka's healing now, it's just a fact. It was kind of close before, Sona wasn't a bad matchup for her in that case where their healing was pretty close, but now it's not even close. Soraka is going to be one of the strongest supports on this patch, but there's a big, and I mean huge, but in the way here. She has to rely on teammates because Soraka doesn't have a lot of damage. She scales really well, but she only really heals. That's her main thing. She heals and peels. Because of that, if you do have a bad team, no matter how well you're doing on Soraka, you might actually be held back. However, if you have a good duo partner or even decent teammates, Soraka is going to feel insanely broken because she adds so much value to everybody else on her team while keeping herself pretty safe that there's going to be no way for anybody to contest her if she makes it out of the laning phase without any issues. And because of the increased healing that she has and the increased sustain, that is a big problem. Soraka is going to be able to choke out a lot of other supports, especially ones who rely on poke, and defensive tanks like Braum, who have the ability to miss their engages and skill shots, are going to have an awful time, because unless they get it more than once or twice in a row, Soraka is not going to be in any danger and neither will her teammate. Second, let's talk about the misfortune point, because she loses movement speed. And movement speed is a stat that not too many think about in the way that you need to think about it in order to understand what it means. Technically, movement speed is the most important stat in the game. It is simultaneously an offensive and defensive stat, which is incredibly powerful if you think about it. And that's just talking about combat terms, not even the fact that it has utility outside of that fact where you can get around the map quickly. But let's iron out some of the points that this movement speed affects. Movement speed means that she can't dodge skill shots as easily, she can't run away as easily, she can't chase as easily. You get the idea. You could list off a lot of things that are impacted by her losing out on this movement speed. Just in case you weren't convinced enough, she can't roam between lanes, she can't get to Dragon fast, she can't go from bot lane to Rift Herald for a fight as fast. There's a lot of differences that get made here all across the map. This takes gold out of her pocket. This means that she can't get to fights that she needs to be to in order to win. And even if she does get there, she might not be as strong as she was before. But while we're on the misfortune point, let's talk about the Sivir thing real quick, because Sivir did get a small buff. And while it is small, if something goes right, Sivir will be one of the top 80 carries on this patch. You see, Sivir's E gets buffed, and it gives her more mana early, which means that she has more of a reason to use it, as if she didn't already, in order to get free mana by blocking things in trades with her opponents. At the same time, if Sustain and Enchanter supports are getting more popular, Sivir's value will be driven up, because she won't be able to get shoved out of lane because she eventually runs out of mana before she gets Essence Reaver or kills her assist using something like Presence of Mind. That is no longer an option for the opponents to play towards, and it's no longer a mistake that Sivir can make. So if you take this mistake away and proactive counterplay away from it, then all of a sudden you have a champion who feels a lot stronger even though only a small change was made. Lastly, let's talk about that Taric change, which, while being self-explanatory, does have some hidden things about it. You and your ally that you bash in lose armor, and Taric has less health. That's pretty normal. You will be weaker overall because you're not as tanky, and your allies don't get to be as tanky because you don't have as much armor. Makes sense. However, Taric also won't be able to make people unkillable now by just using their W and then using their Q on them over and over again in fights, because the losing out on the armor means they will be able to take more damage, and Taric's Q early on won't be enough to sustain through that. This simultaneously nerfs him in support and also as a funnel champion, but primarily as a funnel champion. Taric now can rely on instead going for aggressive engages, landing his E, and that is the sort of playstyle that a Taric support more often does. You're not sitting there and following up on a Master Yi diving into the enemy team and just trying to keep him alive. You are instead going aggressive and flashing on people with your stun and engaging the fights and putting yourself at risk and allowing your AD carry to play more safely because people have to worry about you bashing their heads in with a hammer. While yes, he will be weaker to poke, and yes, he will not be able to guard his allies as much if he's the one on the front line and is able to generate a lot of value with his healing, shielding, and CC, he's still going to be an excellent support. It's just not going to be free LP every time you pick it now. But with all of that, hopefully you get a better understanding of where this patch is going and who's going to rise and fall in terms of the strengths on all the roles across this next patch. It can be hard to understand exactly where a given champion's going to end up across the entire meta, but hopefully with this analysis that I've given you guys, you have a better idea of who you want to pick up, who you want to learn, and who you want to play on the next patch. Who knows, maybe it just happens to be one of your champions that you've always stuck to that's getting a really nice buff. Chances are that's not the case, and a lot of champions are seeing nerfs as the top side of things are getting brought downwards. So make sure that you adjust to what's going on in the meta properly by checking out our website, GameLeap.com. Whether you're trying to learn a new champion, learn some new skills, or just find some ways to practice and make yourself a better player, we have something up there for you. We have guides that get to go super in-depth with players who know exactly what they're talking about because they are experts on what they're doing, whether it be a champion guide or the lane that they're talking about. And even if you're the type of person to learn by watching and you just want to watch some really good players play the game, we even have VOD review analysis of the best players in the world up there too. And if you made it this far, thanks for watching the whole video. What do you guys think about the new patch? I think Riot actually did a very good job this time, and while they definitely dropped the ball with jungle, it seems like every other place is headed in the right direction, and we do know that they're trying to do more changes to bot and mid lane over the next couple patches, so we'll have to see how things get shaken up and who ends up surviving. Anyways, as always, my name is Ace Windstorm, and I will see you all later.